Welcome to the On the Trail podcast. For this week's compilation episode, we are revisiting the Pain Processing Pathway series.
The Pain Processing Pathway has 5 levels, which contain the 4 levels of the joy elevator, right? So remind us, what is the joy elevator?
So the joy elevator basically is the right side of your brain. All right, so real simply, it's my right hemisphere of my brain. The idea is that that right hemisphere operates at 4 levels of function. So if anything goes wrong at level 1, it will affect level 2, 3, and 4, and level 5 on the other side. If something goes wrong at level 2, it'll affect 3 and 4. So the lower, so defining it by levels is partly the point of the joy elevator. It's also the idea that it goes sequentially. It will always start at level 1, then always go to level 2, then always go to level 3, and always go to level. You don't skip around levels. It always goes in sequence. And so our goal as people to be ourselves, to be our relational selves, to be act like ourselves, not turn to somebody else, is that we want to be living from the 4th floor of that joy elevator. That 4th floor we call the action center. That's the identity center, the joy center, the action center. It's, the captain, whatever it is, a whole lot of terms that we've used for it. But it's the part of our brain that we want to be in charge, because that's the part of our brain that remembers who we are, how it's like us to act, what our core values are, what our character is like, and it just shows up automatically. So problems happen if my joy elevator gets stuck at the 1st floor and I'm operating in huge attachment pain, then I may not be able to operate from that top floor. And so part of what maturity is about is developing the capacity to experience some disturbance at these lower levels without it getting me offline at the higher level where I act like myself. So in a nutshell, the joy elevator it's the 4 levels of brain function on the right hemisphere of the brain. Also, your brain always goes not only from bottom up, so 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th floor, it will also always go from right to left. So it has to go through the joy elevator first before it ever gets to what we call the narrative engine. It gets to that part of my brain on the left hemisphere that starts doing problem solving and making decisions and analyzing and putting things into words and all that other stuff. And that's why we regularly talk about things happening faster than conscious thought. And the reason they're happening faster than conscious thought is they're happening on this right hemisphere of the brain. It's this joy elevator process that's taking place. And if something breaks down there, I can be offline and have everything messed up before I ever get to what something means to me, right? Before I ever get to this idea, this is what I have learned to think about this, right? In other words, I can be offline before I ever even get to that part of my brain function. So this was really a revelation to me, because I'd grown up being taught that all emotions are rooted in what I believed. And so belief was the starting point for everything that I was doing in terms of resolving emotions, only to find out there's a whole other half of the brain over here that is dealing with stuff before I ever get to my beliefs. And so bringing these things together creates the pain processing pathway. So the pain processing pathway in a nutshell is I have to deal with all 4 floors of the joy elevator, and I have to deal with the narrative engine on the left side of my brain. This is why simply telling somebody, change the way you think, don't believe that, doesn't always help, because it's only addressing this 5th level, if you will. It's addressing the left brain side of it and bypassing everything going on the right side of the brain.
Yeah. So could you talk a little bit more about where it was Carl Lehman who coined the term pain processing pathway, correct?
I believe so. It was his book where I read the term.
Okay.
So the pain processing pathway, basically, the idea is that if we start in the left side of the brain with beliefs, then I should just be able to correct your thinking on something, and that should resolve the problem. So if I say to you, look at it this way, look at it from this perspective, and that works, that means I had a level 5 problem. My problem was at the interpretive part of things. And just looking at it from a different perspective actually took care of things, and I'm okay now. So that lets me know that's where my problem was. But if I give you a new perspective and I talk about it, I say, well, the Bible says this, and this is the way God wants you to think about it, and that doesn't resolve it, then that means we got to move now and start going backwards down the joy elevator. So I go to the action center of the brain. That's my identity center. And at this point, What I am needing is I'm needing somebody to sort of show me what this looks like so my mirror neurons can watch you do it and go, okay, I think I see it now. I can imitate you. I can do what I'm seeing you do and learn at that level. If that doesn't fix things, right, then we go to the next level, and that's now the level floor number 3 of the joy elevator. And that's where my goal is to stay attuned to the world around me. And so this is where I say, let's do this together. All right, tune into me, stay focused on me. Let's do this together. And, that can sometimes take care of that. If I've spoken to you, that didn't fix it. If I'm showing you, that doesn't fix it. If I'm saying, let's do this together, it doesn't fix it. Now I'm going down to, I've probably got an amygdala fight or flight issue going on, in which case I need to soothe that before we can do anything else. So maybe we'll take some deep breaths together. Maybe we'll, go through some of the soothing exercises together, but we're trying to calm down that amygdala. And then if I get all the way down to level 1, it means I've got an attachment pain problem. And at the attachment pain problem, my goal is, I say, to sit with you, to be present with you so that you know that you are not alone in this, no matter how dark and deep it gets. And so I can think of these all with S words. Obviously it's shocking to everybody. There are S words to all of this. So
you don't have an acrostic for all of that. You're going more pastoral where you have, the same letter for every point.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So this will preach, right? So so if I have a narrative issue, then I speak to you and I give you a new narrative. If it's a level 4 of the fourth floor of the joy elevator, then I show you. So that's the word. I show you at that point what to do. If it's at the level 3, floor number 3 of the joy elevator, now I'm going to share it with you. We're going to do it together. If it's at the amygdala level 2, second floor assessment level, then I'm going to help you soothe from where you're at. And then at level 1, I stay present with you. I'm going to sit. I'm going to stay present with you because this is an attachment issue. So I can give you a couple of examples of this because this is pretty heady, hard to picture stuff. So Chris Corsi explained it to me this way. He said he and Jen were walking up a lighthouse stairs. They live in Michigan. We are often up in Michigan. You can picture this. He's walking up this lighthouse stairs together, and part way up, it's sort of like Jen remembers she has a fear of heights. And she began to shut down. And so his first thing was what? To talk to her. Oh, it's going to be okay. We're going to get this. Didn't help. Right. So I told him, all right, this is not a level 5 issue. Then he's like, well, what, let's just take a step. Just take a step. It's just like this. Let me show you how I did. And that didn't help. And then it was, okay, let's do this together. Let me hold your hand, put my arm in. That still didn't help. Right. So he's just going down the list. He's okay, let's just take a minute to breathe together and to be together. Finally, they just sat there next to each other and then they began doing it in the opposite order. He sat there for a while and then they went to soothing for a bit. And then we got to the point. And by the time they got back up to level 5, she was the one saying, well, this is the perspective I need. This is what's going on. And they were able to make it all the way to the top. So, but when we talk about pain processing is that if this pathway, I get stuck at some point, then my pain remains unprocessed. And to the extent that my pain remains unprocessed, I'll be stuck and I won't be able to function the way that I want to function. And so it's helpful to think in terms of this because you can kind of tell where somebody is stuck and the way in which they are stuck, which intervention is needed. And so I found this an incredibly helpful thing. I think I said I'd tell 2 stories, but
if you want, if you have the second in mind.
So I was speaking one time and a story that I told triggered somebody. I try not to tell stories that are too triggering, but sometimes you can't help it because you just don't know. Mm-hmm. And this guy was hyperventilating and couldn't function. He couldn't talk. And so I got there, wasn't going to do any good for us to have a conversation. He couldn't do that. So first I just sat there and then I said, is it okay if I touch your arm? Right. Because you get permission just to be together. And then I said, can I help you? We had to quickly get to the point of, can I help? Let's practice breathing together and help him get his breathing under control. And then I tried to go back up and found, he still can't talk. Okay, so let's go do some more breathing. I got my hand on your shoulder so I'm here. I'm here with you. It's okay. You're not alone. And then finally, he got the bright idea to text. He couldn't talk, but he started texting me what was going on in his head. Found out what triggered him. I was able to actually do a spiritual warfare prayer with him, and to which he just agreed yes, because he's like, yes, I agree with what you just did. And then he took another deep breath, and then after that he could talk. And so now we walked through this whole process together. By the time we were done, he had processed this pain. It had gone all the way through the pain processing pathway. And what that meant was he was functional again. He could, take off. He could, do whatever he needed to do. Didn't mean he was totally better, but he was functional again because he was now back within his window of tolerance. Mm-hmm. So that's an example of how understanding those 5 levels of function of the pain processing pathway can help you know what kind of intervention is needed.
Yeah, it's so helpful. And so you went through the S's. There are also some A's, and I thought we could take, we could start slowing down maybe a little bit on each level and look at what is the task of each level, because the S's that you shared are like the solution to the problem.
Yeah.
And it's also helpful to understand, like at each level, this is the task that is involved. So for instance, level 1 is attachment, to stay securely connected as a situation unfolds. So yeah, could you talk to us more about level 1?
Yeah, so level 1 is the attachment level. It is anchored in the nucleus accumbens and the thalamus, right? Because that'll clear everything up for everybody. The attachment, basically, this is the part of our brain that craves things. And so what happens is that I have at this very deep level a craving for something. It could be everything from a craving for chocolate to a craving for an experience or an addiction to a craving for a person or connection. And it can be from mild to intense. So for example, I'll give you, one you'll appreciate. You bought us these really nice fountain pens for Christmas, right? I have now lost 3 fountain pens, right, in the last 6 months. And the other day, every now and then I'll find myself like missing my fountain pen. I'm looking everywhere. Where's my fountain pen? I want this. That is a low level craving, if you will. It's like no other pen will do. I want that fountain pen. So that's an example of something that is happening at level 1 attachment. It's not a rational thing happening because I'm thinking about this, having conscious thoughts about it. It's just there is a craving says, I want my fountain pen. Nothing else will do. We all have these experiences, right? It's like tacos are the only thing that's going to work right now. It can't be a burrito. It can't be whatever. It's like, and I have these very specific cravings, and I can have generalized cravings too. So what happens is my attachment level wants to bond with another person in joy. I want to be with somebody who's happy to be with me. So it's at this level that addictions form, because at this level, if I can't have access to someone who's happy to be with me, if I can't form the kind of joy bond I'm actually looking for, I will find a non-relational substitute. And that's when I can find myself craving cocaine, craving heroin, craving alcohol, craving carbohydrates, craving, whatever the non-relational substitute is. Craving sexual stimulation, right? No, pardon?
I said, to be clear, not you yourself.
Well, no, I mean, I've probably craved all those things at some point, although I've never had cocaine or heroin.
I've
never had
drugs.
that. Yeah, I've never had drugs. I can't. But I know people who have. This is also the level at which we experience attachment pain, which was the source of your question, which is because I have this craving, in a sense, where the light bulb's coming on from a prior conversation, and meaning the light bulb coming on means a craving is arising. I want to be with you. I want to be with somebody. And what I'm looking for isn't available to me. That will create attachment pain. So I can literally have attachment pain for that fountain pen, right? It's like, it's not here. So that's a very low level attachment pain. I can have attachment pain to, I wish I could be at our home in Michigan right now. I wish I didn't have to be here, and that's a form of attachment pain. You can have attachment pain for the past, nostalgia. I wish I could be back in those good old days when I did this. You can have attachment pain for all kinds of things at all kinds of levels. And so the issue here is that there is no natural pathway back to joy from attachment pain, in the same way that we have joy pathways or neural pathways that we can form back to joy from sadness and shame and disgust and despair and anger and fear. So with that in mind, attachment pain kind of falls into its own separate category. It can also be combined with all of those other emotions. So when you think about grief, for example, I am usually combining attachment pain with sadness because I've lost something I want, with despair, like I'm not going to get this ever again, with anger, this isn't fair, right? With fear, what's going to happen to me now, right? And so what happens is you go through something like grief and literally all of the emotions are being triggered simultaneously, which is why they sometimes talk about it as stages. You deal with this and then this and this. And that may be true, but I also know that at some level what's happening is that all of my emotional system is getting triggered. And so at different times, I'm going to be dealing with different levels of those emotions. So attachment pain is kind of like that craving pain that I have that says something that I desperately want is not available to me. So it becomes the source of a lot of love songs, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I'm in so much despair because I can't have you right now. All I want is you, kind of thing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So when someone is stuck at level 1 in
attachment, right?
Yeah, in level 1 attachment, if someone is stuck there in a more mild case, from the fountain pen to a relationship with a person, but it doesn't feel impossible. It's just a mild case. Do you have suggestions for how to recover?
Part of it is this is where you talk about things like being present, mindfulness, if you will. It is being aware of my condition, recognizing it, and then saying, I've got a problem to solve here. And maybe I can find a healthier solution to this problem than an unhealthier solution to the problem. So if it's a mild one, I can usually think my way through to a better choice. So like if I'm feeling attachment pain and I'm suddenly realize I'm rummaging the refrigerator and I don't even know what I want, I can catch myself and go, hey, Marcus, you're just feeling attachment pain right now. You don't really want ice cream. And that sort of thing. So there's at milder levels, I can do that. At more extreme levels, I need help doing that.
Mm-hmm.
I need somebody to be present with me. Yeah.
Or it's even being able to recognize, like, for instance, I think how often when I have been separated from you and Mom and Ben, I'm not usually very good at actually being on my phone, but when I am separated from you guys and you are my core, you are my people, I will call one of you on the phone and reestablish a point of connection because I'm having attachment pain because we are not together. And that's a way of like, okay, yes, here I'm able to be with my people even when we're not actually able to be together.
Yeah. Well, and because it's the deepest level of brain function, it is also the deepest level of pain we can feel. And, that just means sometimes we just have to feel it.
Mm-hmm.
And try in the midst of feeling it to get back to the relational part of my brain and act like myself anyway.
Well, and maybe what I'm about to say could come into the next part of my question, but this is also where listening prayer and seeking God, and there's some really good Psalms that, just, oh, my soul, and seek the Lord. And so talk to us about, what happens if you're having just desperate attachment pain and the person you were attached to has died, or you're estranged, or for whatever reason you have no access and it feels impossible. You can't solve it. What do you do?
Well, so I'll use like this example. I remember when I was in seminary, I had about a 5-month gap between the city where I grew up, and I had tons of friends and I knew everybody, and I moved and I relocated. And I was now in a different state, in a different city. I was living with my parents, and I really only had one relational connection at that point. It was a girl who asked me out. And I said yes, and quickly fell in love because she became my whole world. because she was all of my attachment was connected to her. Well, my dad was in a car accident. Grandpa Warner, he was in a car accident, almost died when a drunk driver hit him going like 90 miles an hour through a stoplight. He was unconscious for 3 months. We didn't know if he was going to live. And then just as he's getting out of the hospital, she breaks up with me. And at the time, I had never felt that kind of attachment pain. I had no category for that. And, I'd convinced myself that was the future. I'd found the one, all this. And so I went into depression because only she could fix what I was, right? In my way of thinking, the only solution to this is for her, to want to be with me again. And so as I was in that, I started seminary, right? In this place of having just gone through the crisis with my dad, being in a deep place of attachment pain, and I couldn't focus, right? Because I'm having level 1 issues in my brain. It's making everything else above that struggle to stay online. That didn't actually resolve until I met somebody else, right? So when I met somebody else and all of a sudden there was this hope of, oh, maybe there's a different solution to what I'm feeling right now. I couldn't think my way there, but once I experienced it, I mean, it was even actually just a fleeting relationship, but it was just experiencing the fact that, oh, there is hope in this world, took away that attachment pain for me, helped me get back to being myself, and gave me some lessons. But in the middle of it, honestly, I had no tools for what I was going through. Yeah, it was a pretty dark time.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing. That's a very good example, I think. Yeah, thank you for sharing.
Well, and honestly, Brenda, your mom, Brenda has similar stories, right? Yeah. Of having painful breakups in her past that made her go into a very dark place. And it's because you're dealing with attachment pain that then triggers despair that joy is now hopeless, right? It now triggers this belief. So there's a despair, and then there's a belief that goes with the despair, and then there's all these toxic thoughts that accumulate around it, and so it takes on a life of its own at that point.
Yeah. So what are some steps to get out of it?
So some things you can do yourself, and some things you need help. Right. So one of the things that helped me was I talked to a guy at seminary who'd gone through almost exactly the same thing, only worse. Right. He had been engaged. Right. And almost on the verge of his wedding day. Right. His fiance called it off. And talking to him and talking to somebody who could be empathetic. And then realizing that he was currently married and had kids and was living a good life. So even though that first thing, it was helpful to have people tell me their stories and say, okay, maybe there is some hope here, to have somebody who could understand the depth of what was going on. So I didn't feel alone in it. Like, okay, there's somebody who gets it. And so all of those things had to happen. I needed people who could still be happy to be with me. I needed people who could kind of enter into what was going on, and I could say, okay, other people have lived through this, and there was somebody who could share it. And at some point too, I realized too that God actually gave me a way out of this early on, and that I remember I was sitting in a restaurant and this thought came into my head, and this is where you learn to recognize what are God thoughts, what are devil thoughts. So, but this thought was about this girl. It was give her to me. And if you're supposed to have her, I'll give her back. And I remember basically saying no.
That's one of those right. Stop, listen, obey, watch
That's
things, and you choose not to obey, and you still get to watch what happens.
Stop, listen, obey moment where I stopped, I listened, I knew what God wanted me to do, and I said no. And literally my depression kind of began there. And so there was a rebelliousness, right, at the heart of some of this depression in my case too, because I was intentionally saying, I know what I need to be happy, and until you need to give me what I want. And that's really not uncommon either. There's a lot of us who are convinced we know what we need in order to be happy. And so we are not going to be okay with God until he gives it to us. And that is a form of rebellion, and it always gives ground to the enemy. And so I think that a big part of my depression too has some spiritual warfare to it that was anchored in that as well.
I've heard you and Jim Wilder make the profound statement that suffering becomes trauma when we feel alone in it. In order for suffering to keep from becoming traumatic, our brains need to process the pain at all 5 levels of the pain processing pathway. So level 1, attachment; level 2, assessment; level 3, attunement; level 4, action; and level 5, narrative. Or if you want another A, I think you've said articulation.
Yeah.
And last episode, we started talking about this pathway and how to meet someone's pain at each level. And we made it through level 1. Huzzah. So let's see how far we get in this episode.
I'm a little relieved. When you said we were going to continue, I thought we were going to talk more about the girl who dumped me. But okay. All right. Good. We're talking about the brain. That's
do you need to go back and finish processing that pain?
No, I think we're good.
But yeah, okay. So for real, is there anything else that you wanted to say on level 1 that we didn't get to because we kind of had to just cut off?
It helps me to think about it that at that attachment level is where the addiction is forming, because it also helps us understand that addiction recovery, a large part of that has to do with forming attachments, relationally joyful attachments to take the place of those other ones. And that's why it's so hard to just say no. You actually have to have a replacement attachment that's bringing real joy as a significant part of whatever addiction recovery method you use. Mm-hmm. So that helps me think about it too.
Yeah, no, that's key. All right, level 2, the assessment. We spent some time talking about this just a few episodes ago. Level 2 is our amygdala. The task of level 2 is assessment. It's to evaluate the safety of a situation. So do you want to talk to us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so this is really the level that controls our joy switch, as Chris Corsi would call it. And so when we talk about having a switch on the side of our brain that allows us access to our high level emotions, if our switch goes off, it is always because of what happens here. So I did hear, we did a conference on DID several years ago, and Jim Wilder was a presenter. I was a presenter. We had Elaine Packel and some others. Dan Rumberger was there. And but I remember Jim saying that one of the differences between like a buried memory and one that we can recall is how deep down in the brain I got triggered, and that how deep down the triggering was that shut things off. And so if it makes it up to level 3, I can usually recall the memory. If it got buried below, down at levels 1 and 2, then oftentimes I won't remember it. And so that can apply to all kinds of things, because there's people who don't remember traumatic things that happened to them. And it's usually because the brain processing pathway part of that got shut down right here at level 2 and didn't make it up to level 3. That's more of a curiosity to me. I don't know how relevant it is to everyday life, but for some people it's extremely relevant. Mm-hmm. And but it helped me think about that. And we've already talked quite a bit about taming the amygdala and the soothing things that we can do to help with that. But that, again, is our fight and flight center. That's largely what's happening there.
Mm-hmm. So will you give just quickly, what is the solution?
Yeah, the word we use here is soothe, right? Yeah. And that is, so the intervention is, I want to do something to soothe that. That's where we use the best practices for calming or quieting. And so it's breathing, deep breathing, and getting control of my central nervous system. And it's exaggerating emotions and then quieting them again. It's soothing by kind of rubbing out the tension from different muscle groups, tightening them and relaxing them, and all those things that we do. It can also be things that you do to shock your body, like take a cold shower or splash cold water in your face, or take a hot bath and, have candles or whatever, people do that makes them, some people like a weighted blanket or something like that, that just is soothing to them and helps them to quiet or calm. It can even be like, for us, we use like a fan in the background when going to sleep. And sometimes, just having that sound is enough to kind of trigger something for us. It's, it's time to quiet and sleep.
Thank you. All right, level 3, moving on up the elevator. The task of level 3 is attunement. It's seeking to understand each other's feelings. And when stuck, the feeling is being overwhelmed with emotions and, maybe just wanting I just want to be understood, or I'm but not on a narrative level, but like
Sure.
on an attunement level.
So level 3, let me describe this one. Camp out here for just a little bit.
Yeah, sounds
Okay,
great.
so level 3, in our book, Rare Leadership in the Workplace, Dr. Wallet and I describe this as the brain's radar. It's something that's constantly running in the background, and it will alert your brain on what it should focus on. So at a leadership level, right, a big part of leadership is that intuitive sense of this is what needs our focus right now. And you can't really put it into words why that needs our focus. It's not always metric driven. Sometimes it's just kind of this gut feeling, this needs our attention. And so there are obvious things that happen with this where, I'm in a room because my radar is going. All of a sudden I see something flash on the side and I realize, oh, a mouse just ran along the side of the wall. Maybe it's time to go get a cat. So there was that's happened before, but what's happening is my focus wasn't there, but because the radar was running in the background, it had got my attention and said, no, give that your focus right now. And so this happens a lot, so that you can think about this part of my brain as that radar system. There's a really good YouTube on this. Trying to remember the guy's name. I think it's Ian McGilchrist. Dr. Ian McGilchrist, he's a Scottish neuroscientist. And so he's got this delightful Scottish accent, right? And he's teaching behind one of those cartoon things that draws itself out while he's talking. So there's constantly something new coming onto the art. But one of the stories he tells in this presentation is like a bird that is trying to be very focused on pecking seeds from among pebbles. And so that's a high focus job. Well, the left hemisphere of the brain is what excels at focus. The right hemisphere of the brain, particularly this level 3, is what is telling my left brain where to focus. Now, if you've ever watched a bird do this, what you'll notice is that birds will peck, 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 and then they'll look, right? They'll peck and then they'll lift their heads and they look around from right to left. And then they go back to pecking and then they're up and they're looking around. So a bird brain, right, is stereotypically, because it is tiny, they can't do both processes simultaneously as easily as us. So you actually get to watch them shifting from being right brain oriented, looking around, to being left brain oriented, focusing. But when you think about, he's got to have a high level of focus to make sure he's getting seeds and not pebbles. At the same time, he has to be aware of the surroundings. Like, do I have family members nearby who need my help? Is there a predator nearby that may want to eat me? That radar has to be constantly going in the background. So this part of my system is also the part that allows me to read body language. So leaving aside then this bird analogy for a second, the other thing, and the radar analogy, the other thing that happens at this level that you may have heard in life model circles is mutual mind. So mutual mind is happening when my level 3 and your level 3 are attuning to each other. And so as I look at you right now, you look at me, right? We're reading each other's body language, and it's not at the level of conscious thought. I'm not putting it into words. I'm not trying to analyze what's going on, but I will have feelings. I will have intuition about where this is going. And I can either read you correctly or I can misread you, right? You can read me correctly or misread me. I might look at you and go, oh, she's like mad at me. It's like, oh no, she's just hungry. Or maybe, you can misread people. And, but you can actually carry on full conversations this way, right? Just by my singular level 3 and your level 3 being in sync, we can have full conversations. Like if there's a third person in the room, we can communicate a whole lot to one another about what we think about that third person, right? And so that's what we mean by mutual mind. We are at this moment sharing we're in sync with one another. We are attuned with one another. We are on the same page, and we can communicate. I might even be able to communicate to you non-verbally this way: leave the room right now, or go shut that door, or go do something. There's a whole lot you can communicate. So one of the things they do at Thrive training, for example, Thrive Today, is they will do nonverbal stories. And one of the reasons they do the nonverbal stories is they are strengthening this part of the brain and its ability to read people, to sync with people, and to enter into that mutual mind state. Mm-hmm. So,
You know what this reminds me of is I had a friend in undergrad and we were really good at mutual mind. Like we spent lots of time together and she caught on, she was just delighted that I seemed to be able to read her mind. And we would be sitting across from each other like
you
at
have
lunch.
a warfare cure for that, but okay, no, just kidding.
But like we would be sitting in a group of people talking and she literally would stop every now and then. She would just kind of stop so that I could finish her sentence, or add to the story or whatever, because we could just tell that we both knew what was going on. Like we both were on the same page, we were in sync, and we knew what the other person was probably thinking, and we could read each other's we could read each other's body language, and we knew the context. And what was interesting was we actually, because of study abroads and different things, we spent almost a year apart, and I noticed a distinct difference where we hadn't been in that close relationship anymore and doing all this. And there was one time when she stopped expecting me to like jump right in. And I was like, I'm not there. I didn't have that same attunement anymore because we hadn't been spending all that time together where we could read each other really well anymore. But it just, there's an intimacy and a friendship and that can happen too with mutual mind.
No, it's a very important function in our human experience, because you hear people all the time say 90% of communication is nonverbal. Well, that's largely happening here at this level 3 attunement level. This is also where we start getting into the idea of listening prayer. And so in my book, A Deeper Walk, when we talk about listening prayer, so there's two kinds. There's right brain listening prayer, left brain listening prayer. So the left brain part is kind of easy because God sort of overrides the system and just talks to you. And it's just mostly at that point a matter of recognizing that these words in my head are coming from God. Although he can make it clearer than that. He can give visions and dreams and send angels and, all kinds of stuff that happens like that in the Bible. But there is something like a mutual mind state with God in which it is a nonverbal communication in which we are simply in sync with his spirit. And so whereas we can't read God's body language because he's invisible, there is still this inner sense that you get that we're on the same page here. And that is reflected largely in the sense of peace, that I have a sense of peace about what's going on here, that I feel like, this is right. I may have a sense that something hard is correct, but there's still a sense of peace that this is what God's asking me to do. And so that mutual mind state with God, often then after I've been in that mutual mind state, I can then put into words what was going on, but they're not words at the time that it happens. Same thing like you and I, if we share mutual mind together, afterwards, I could put into words kind of what was going on, but at the time you're just experiencing it. And that's kind of what that walk with God is like at that level, where you're experiencing mutual mind with him. Is you're just sort of experiencing the sense of where he's taking you with things, and what is bringing you a sense of clarity and peace. And then later you can often put it into words. And but that's what we mean by mutual mind, and all of that is happening at level 3. And it's why the things that we do to build this part of our brain help us to be more relationally engaged with other people.
Mm-hmm. So if I am feeling stuck or somebody else is feeling stuck at this level, what are the interventions here?
So there are some exercise interventions that you can do. I think we called this the share level.
Support.
Share support.
Mm-hmm.
In building balance, we call it support,
mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So the idea is, let me support you in doing this. Let me come alongside of you and help you do this, as opposed to let me show you how to do it or just tell you how to do it. And so one of the things that we do, for example, is you can grow this through charades, right? These nonverbal stories and things like this is a way of growing your ability to get in sync with people. You can do this through eye contact, and you're specifically trying to be left eye to left eye. Really exactly. Yeah, left. And,
we're not on video right now. They can't see us.
But it's like, as you're going left eye to left eye, what's happening there is like, that is like the most intimate thing, because the right hemisphere of my brain that remembers who I am is controlling my left eye because it flips like that. And so that is where we have the greatest connection. And so if I can share joy at that level with somebody and we can, read, then that helps us strengthen a whole lot of things that are functioning in my brain. So that's why, again, I go back to Thrive training, because they actually have developed exercises to help strengthen this part of brain function. But in general, what we're talking about is I do this by supporting you and sharing experiences with you that help this part of my brain to grow. I don't think this part of the brain can grow apart from relational experience, right? I need to have somebody else there practicing for this part of my brain to grow, which is why you can't just go to a counselor all the time and get it.
Mm. All right. So are we moving up the elevator?
Let's move up the elevator.
Level 4.
Yeah, level 4. So level 4 is the right orbital prefrontal cortex, right? So that is I just like saying that. I practiced a long time to be able to rattle that off. But it's the right hemisphere. Orbital means behind the eye. Eye is orb. Prefrontal, it's in the front part of the brain, and it's the cortex, it's this outer layer. So the idea here is that this part of my brain right behind my right eye is what we call the joy center. It's also my identity center. I've always loved the fact that joy and identity are so intimately connected the way God designed our brain. And so we have this is, again, the part of the brain that we want to be in control of things, because when I'm functioning from this level of my brain, I will act the most like myself. I'll be the most relational. I'll be the most engaged. I'm going to do my best thinking, my best problem solving. I'm going to do my best analysis work. And when this thing is in charge, this part of my brain is in charge, you get my best self. And so that's the goal, is to not let to regulate our emotions in such a way that I keep this part of my brain engaged. So the stronger that this part of my brain develops through joy, through all kinds of joyful connections through the years, through a collection of memories that tell me this is who I am, the more consistent and organized my identity is, then this part of my brain can actually regulate things that are sent up to me from the amygdala. So in other words, the amygdala can get triggered. It can send a scary message up the line. But if I have a strong enough, well enough developed fourth floor here, that floor can say, you know what, that's okay. I know how it's like me to act when this happens. Doesn't have to be overwhelming. Let's everybody calm down. Let's all let's do some soothing and some breathing. We'll be fine. And now this is what we're going to do. And so it's possible for this part of my brain to stay in charge even when it gets these signals. And that's kind of what we mean by maturity, right? I know that I developed my maturity when I am able to keep this part of my brain in control and in charge, even when I'm getting triggered by, or getting these impulse things sent up from my amygdala and telling me that I'm in a bad situation or in a scary situation. So one of the ways we do this is we have to grow this through joy workouts, which are, again, always relational. As I am developing the ability to learn, and my brain is learning, how is it like me to act when this happens? How do I not turn into somebody else when this happens? How do I grow such a strong core identity that I'm not constantly becoming a different person every time I feel an upsetting emotion?
Mm-hmm. On a basic level, I'm thinking about a chart that it's in the Journey Group's curriculum, but I think it's based off of a chart in Chris Corsi's book, Transforming Fellowship, where it just goes through each task of the levels and then what you're feeling at each, if you're stuck at each, and then what the solution is, or the intervention. And here the task of level 4 is action, or responding to a situation. And when you're feeling stuck, you might be feeling inadequate or like, I don't know what to do, which a solution would be engaging the mirror neurons and having an example and like showing you what to do. So could you talk more about the intervention there?
Yeah, if I'm not acting like myself, or if I'm with somebody who isn't acting like themselves,
Mm-hmm.
then what I kind of want to do is hold a little bit of a mirror up to them. So try to activate their mirror neurons and get a picture of what they're actually doing. And so this is where a healthy shame message comes in. Like, hey, doesn't feel like you're acting like yourself right now. It seems like maybe this doesn't feel like you. And so when I say healthy shame message, I'm not trying to generate a toxic reaction from them. I'm trying to call their attention to the fact that they are not acting like themselves right now. So how I do that could look a lot of different ways. Like, dads are famous for being able to just give a look. And that look is communicating, hey, you're not really acting like yourself right now. And we handle this in a more relational way. Moms are famous for looks like that too. But I think that we have this idea that that's what I'm ultimately trying to do. My intervention here is in showing you like this. I'm
going to say that description is a little bit of attunement.
It is attunement, but it is attunement in the sense of it's not stopping at me attuning to you. It's me taking it to the next step and showing you what this looks like. Mm-hmm. And so I may be showing you reminding you of what it would look like to act like yourself here. And so I might do that by modeling it. I might do that by reminding you of it. But at some level, I'm trying to help you get back to functioning at that level of your operating system. So that's a key part of the solution.
All right. So we could go up to level 5 right now, or we could take one more episode to do level 5 and wrap things up.
Yeah, there's some more things we probably should hit on this other one anyway. So,
do you want to give some final thoughts for this episode and go on to another, continue the discussion next time? That sounds good.
I had a final thought and I lost it.
Okay, well, let me pause then by just saying, if people want to find out more about joy elevators and pain processing pathway, I know joy elevators you talk about in rare leadership,
yes,
and building bounce. And again, I recommend Journey Group's curriculum. It's written by Amy Hamilton Brown. It's excellent small group curriculum that not only teaches a wealth of information that draws from Deeper Walk, Life Model Works, Thrive Today, and more, but it really encourages practice, which is how transformation happens. And there are 2 levels, 2 books, and both talk about the joy elevator, but Journey Group's level 2 has a whole unit that goes through each stage of the joy elevator and explains the task, its feeling, its need. So I really encourage people to check that out. So any final thoughts, Father?
Yeah, I think Dr. Wilder calls this level the captain a lot of the times, and for good reason. Like I've said many times, this is the part of the brain I want in charge, because if I can, this part of my brain can grow for as long as I live, and it grows with the experience of joy. It collects all the memories of how it's like me to act when these happen. And so the encouraging thing here is that this is a part of my brain that grows with appreciation. It grows with relational interaction. It grows, it's constantly updating and constantly expanding. And so the good news here is that wherever you're at right now, that has the ability to grow. One last thing too, as I think about this, is that what's really helped me to think about this is the idea of the ring in the brain of the infant. And that is that when an infant is born, they have no ability to act like themselves with the various emotions that they feel. And so an infant will the brain will act like a totally different person with every emotion that they feel. So, but there is like this ring around their identity center that is gradually connecting to each emotion that they can feel and then connecting it to their identity center. And it helps me think that an infant has to learn how to feel all the various emotions and without turning into a different person. The more successful the infants and toddlers are in doing this, the more organized of a personality they're going to have, the more integrated and fully functional they have, and the less likely they are going to be to turn into somebody else when they feel these upsetting emotions. So if I find that I am 62 and still turning into a different person when I feel an emotion, it means that those parts of my brain are still not developed. And that means I'm going to need to do some work to focus on that. So that's where I practice appreciation. It's where I do storytelling. It's where I am actively working on collecting stories about how to act like myself when I feel that emotion, and building those skills. So that ring picture kind of helped me. Like I picture it like a ring with strings attached to all the various different emotions. And that if I do this well, then no matter what emotion I feel, they'll all have a pathway back to my core identity so that I keep acting like myself.
In order for suffering to keep from becoming traumatic, our brains need to process the pain at all 5 levels of the pain processing pathway. So you have level 1, attachment, level 2, assessment, level 3, attunement, level 4, action, and level 5, narrative. So in this episode, let's review level 4.
All right. I'm counting. Level 4. All right. I know. I always got to start with attachment, assessment, attunement, action. Now, so level 4 goes by so many different names. It's confusing, right? Because it's been called the command center. It's been called the identity center. It's been called the joy center. It's been called the orbital prefrontal cortex, right? It's been called the action center. We've called it a whole lot of things. You've probably, thrown out some other terms for it too. So this, the idea here is that a whole bunch of brain neuron kind of things connect right here at this point. It's like the intersection of a whole lot of highways, if you will. And so if we want our best self, our most relational self, our joy-based self to handle our problems, then we have to be functioning from this part of our brain. And so what happens is if we don't live out of this part of our brain, that's where we get what we call wearing a mask, or being my false self, or a pseudo self, right? Or a poser, right? And again, there's a lot of different terms for these things, but the idea is that I can be my true self or I can be a false self. My true self is always going to be who I am when I am living from this part of my brain. My false self, Dr. Wilder's come up with a new term for this recently called your as if self.
Okay.
Right. So the as if self is the idea of how I live as if this is, as if I were somebody else that I'm not. In other words, I create a persona that I think I need in order to handle the problem that's in front of me. And so when this takes place, this can happen in a whole wide variety of ways. And it is a big and long topic. So we'll try to unpack it a little bit today. Okay. But we're really talking about the true self versus the false self.
Awesome. Now, do you want to keep talking about the true self, or do you want to talk about, we've been focusing a little bit on the when you are feeling stuck at this level, what is the solution? Do you want to tackle that first? If you're feeling stuck at this level, what's the solution to getting unstuck, and then unpack it more? Or
yeah, so if I am stuck at this level, sometimes you need to be reminded who you are,
mm-hmm.
and you need to be kind of shown again what it's like you to do. So I think my favorite kind of picture of this is from Lion King, right? And Simba has lost himself, right? He's lost his true self. He is now off with his buddies in the jungle, and they are living Hakuna Matata, right? They are out there doing he's doing his best to avoid, filling his calling. And in this vision that he has, right? Well, the line is, you've forgotten who you are, right? Remember who you are. Exactly. So, and then he echoes it over and over and over again as Mufasa fades into the sky, right? So one of the interventions at this point is to remind people who they are and say, you know what? You're not really acting like yourself right now. I know you. This isn't you. All right. So that's one of the interventions here, is just reminding people it's not really like you to handle it like this. I've had times when I've gotten overwhelmed and I've, handled things with more anger than I wanted, or I've handled things with, more disgust than I wanted or something. And I've had to apologize later and said, I'm sorry, I wasn't being my best self, right? That was not who I want to be. I apologize. And so this can work both directions, but the intervention there is usually the reminder. And then if you take it to the next level, it's like, if somebody's still trying to discover who they are, then you have to show them how to do it. So, for example, when I was 10, I remember I was known for my temper tantrums. When I was a kid, I was the youngest in the family, and I was famous for my temper tantrums. In fact, I remember my parents actually introducing me as the the kid with the temper issues. So right between age 10 and 12, though, I realized that they just stopped. I didn't have this anymore. And I was trying to think back of what made the change. And part of what made the change was I remember my oldest sister, who's about 11 years older than me, actually walking me through taking a deep breath, counting to 10, right? And changing the thoughts in my head and kind of walking me through it and showing me how to do this. So, but in a sense, what she was doing, she was showing me how to act like myself in a situation and not turn into a different person. And so we practiced a few times, let's take a deep breath. Okay. Count to 10. Right. And then ask yourself, how is it like me to handle this, this emotion as opposed to just giving into it? And so that's kind of what we're talking about. You can intervene by reminding people who they are. You can also help train this part of people by showing them what it looks like to act like themselves.
Awesome. So what if somebody is in their as if self? What does that look like to intervene? Or is it just something you need to work on in yourself?
So that's a little more tricky, because if I've gone into my as if self, the first intervention is to try to remind people, is that really who you want to be in this situation? Are you, and maybe doing it as a question as opposed to a confrontation, like, you are being your as if self, you are being a bad person, more of a, is this really who you want to be right now? And it doesn't seem like you're really acting like the person I've come to know right now, like something has changed about you. So what you're doing though is you're appealing to their identity. And you're not just saying you're misbehaving, you're doing this badly, you're a bad person, right? What you're doing is you're reminding them of the person they want to be and the person that they usually are. And so that's more of the reminder to help people move from their as if self or their false self and back to their true self. So to continue though, this idea of the false self is a idea that when I get stuck in an emotion I can't get back from. And then just using myself, it's like there's angry Marcus, there's scared Marcus, there's disgusted Marcus. Living for my true self doesn't mean that I don't have those emotions. It means that I don't adopt a totally different value system because I have those emotions. In other words, if I go from being relational me to disgusted me. And when I'm disgusted, I give myself permission to treat you badly, then I am violating the core principles by which I usually live. That's what I mean by I have turned into a different person. My whole value system has shifted, and what I think is okay and what I think is appropriate. So part of that means that my worldview has literally changed.
Right.
Yeah, the values that flow out of that have changed. And so I'm not acting like myself anymore. I may as well be a different person. And that's what we're trying to avoid, right? We don't want to be the sort of person who others will have to walk on eggshells around, because they never know when we're going to adopt a completely different value system and treat them totally differently.
Mm-hmm. So what would be a good way to monitor that in your own self? You're not confronting somebody else and saying, hey, this isn't how you should act. But if you notice yourself, if you recognize you're going there or that you are there, what's a good way to get you out?
So when I notice that I'm going into my alternate self, the first thing I do is I recognize that, first of all, I recognize the pattern. For instance, if I start to feel disgust towards somebody, I'll recognize the thought patterns in my head, because they're always the same when I start going into that place in my head. And so, whereas in the past, I would go into a justification of my thoughts and how disgusted I was. Now I catch myself going, wait a second, you are slipping into disgust right now. You have turned into this other person. So that is, I need a break. And that break can be as little as breaking eye contact and looking away. And I break eye contact and I look away to kind of shut down the relational part of my brain and go into the problem solving part of my brain, right? To try to figure out, okay, what's the problem I need to solve right now? Is it you or is it me? And I go, actually, I'm the problem that needs solved right now. So let me go in here and try to figure this out and go, okay, the problem is that I'm going into my disgust mode. I recognize this pattern. All right, what have I learned to do? I was like, okay, I've got to find some curiosity. I got to find some appreciation. I got to be kind. Once I can find that, now I can go back to the relational side of my brain. I can go, okay, now we can resume eye contact. I remember what I appreciate about you. I can be kind, and I've restored my curiosity. So that's kind of an example of how I would check myself if I find that I've gone into that.
So, one, if it could be that the situation does warrant disgust, but you're still trying to make sure that you aren't handling it in a bad way. And so it's like putting the oxygen mask on yourself first, because you still have to deal with acting like yourself in a situation. So yeah, there's that. And then, I was just going to say what you just spit off there, cake, is we've talked about that before on the podcast.
Talked quite a bit.
Yes, so you can find that in the 4 Habits of Joy-Filled Marriages.
Yeah, it's in several books right now.
Yes.
You know what? I will apologize because cake actually means different things in different books.
Well, it's eye contact or it's
envelope
conversations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and so I separated out envelope conversations and made it its own thing. So in the first couple of books, that's what's in there. And then from the second book on, E is always eye contact. Because what happens is that if I don't catch myself doing this, like if I'm starting to feel disgust with somebody, I am already feeling the disgust. The question here is, can I stay relational, right? This is rare leadership. Can I remain relational and can I act like myself? Can I return to joy? Can I help them return to joy, even though I have felt this disgust? If I can't and my immaturity takes over, then what happens is I don't act like myself. I don't remain relational. I don't return to joy. I don't help them return to joy. I just live in the disgust. And so that's what we're talking about here is I don't want to lose control of who I am simply because a big emotion comes up.
Very good. All right. Any more on level 4, or are you ready for level 5?
Well, I did want to say a little bit on the this false self idea,
Okay.
and that is that there's the false self is largely who I think I need to be in order to protect myself, or who I need to be in order to win. And so that's what tends to be thought of as enemy mode, right? It's what we tend to think of as I'm in the part of my brain that is now not treating you as a person, but treating you as a problem. And so the false self will always come out of that. Now, one of the problems with wearing a mask is that it works, right? It does what I need it to do, or I wouldn't do it all the time. For example, have you ever pretended to be somebody you weren't in order to get someone to like you?
Right.
If I do, and that works, I actually have a problem. Because now the person they're attracted to isn't the real me. It's somebody I've been pretending to be in order for them to like me. So now they like the mask.
Mm-hmm.
They don't like me. And that's one of the reasons why this is a problem. And I go on all kinds of reasons why false self gets us in trouble. And one of them is that it does work. And because it works, it can get us a short-term win, but it's not going to get us a long-term where we want to go. And in the end, if we value relationships more than winning, then that's not a good solution.
Indeed. Well, we probably will come back to that again at some point because it sounds like there's lots to talk about there.
No, there is.
Yeah.
I mean, I've got a whole session on this in our foundations course because we talk about, so you may recall Bill Gillum.
Mm-hmm.
So Bill Gillum wrote Lifetime Guarantee, and he was an exchange life teacher that was the first person who kind of made walking in the Spirit make sense to me. And one of the things that he says is that we all have a flesh identity and we have a spirit identity. And my flesh identity is always like my false self. And my false self is going to be anchored in a couple of things. I just like the way he explains it. And that is, we learn in our society particularly to take our identities from our looks, our personality, or our achievement. And so the idea is that a lot of us learn that we're good enough looking. We look good enough. All we got to do is show up and people are going to accept us. And I remember actually when you were little, going to this church, and we were there with another couple, and the lady weighed like 350 pounds. And you were this adorable little girl, and you know, like to twirl in your skirt and all. And Brenda and I were both, you know, young, and so the contrast between the couple we were with and us was pretty vivid. And we just noticed it was hard to miss that everybody in the church wanted to talk to us and nobody wanted to talk to them, right? Because, you know, we just looked like the kind of people they wanted in the church, right? Whereas this other couple, they weren't quite sure what to do because it was like, you know, I don't know if they're there are sort of people, right? So there's a lot of folks out there who've lived with that kind of rejection all their life. They learned pretty early on, I can't just show up, and because I am so beautiful, people are going to say, oh, we want you to be part of our group. And so when looks doesn't work in American culture, what we tend to turn to next is performance. And by performance, we mean I put on an act. All right. I try to be funny. I try to be witty. A lot of comedians, you know, do this. They learned it in school, that it was a way to get people's attention. And so people will let them be in the group because that's how they add value to the group. Oh, he's funny, she's witty. We like having them around. So they work on their personality. The third way is achievement. And that is, I'm the captain of the basketball team. I'm the captain of the cheerleading squad. I have achieved something really significant enough that gives me enough status that people will want me in the group. So the world system, the way I look at it is the devil gives us an identity using the world and the flesh. So the devil, the world, the flesh. So the devil says, here's your identity. I'm going to use the world to give you an identity based on your flesh. And that means most of us tend to think of our identity as our looks, our personality, and our achievement. And that's actually our worldly identity. It's the false identity. It's the devil's identity. The true identity, our spiritual identity, is what God sees us to be, who God sees us as. And it's not who we are when we're pretending to be something. It's who we are when we're living with joy. Mm-hmm. And so when you bring this living with joy component together with your identity in Christ component, you get this really powerful 1-2 punch that gives us a very stable, healthy identity out of which to live. So kind of wanted to wrap that in there at some level here as we're talking about this level 4 stuff.
Oh, that's so important and so good. And I just wanted to jump in and say the foundation course that you mentioned, people can find that for free. It's 8 sessions for free. It's excellent. And that is at our deeperwalkinternational.org. If you go there, it should be, I'm trying to think of the easiest way to get to it, because you can get to it from multiple places.
You can get it through our app. You can get it through the website. Yeah. You can get to it. I may even be on YouTube, but yeah, you can get to it a variety of places.
Yep. That's very good. Well, how much do you have to say about level 5, or should we split that into another episode?
It probably needs its own episode. But level 5 essentially is where we move from the joy elevator on the right side of our brain over to the left side of our brain. And we finally get to beliefs. And I say finally get to beliefs because, you know, I grew up thinking that beliefs were the source of all of our emotions, and that handling our emotions was basically about changing what we believed. And if I just change what I believe, everything, you know, will fix itself. What I have learned is that there's a whole engine in the brain, right, that we've spent the last several episodes talking about that is affecting my emotions before my beliefs ever get activated. And so narrative engine is very important, right? The cognitive engine, all the stuff going over here. Level 5 is what we mean by the thinking part of my brain that does the problem solving, does the analysis, puts things into words, and it tries to come up with the simplest possible explanation for what's going on. So there's a whole lot that we can say about that, but honestly, we probably need another episode.
Oh, perfect. We will do that then. So I think maybe it would be helpful if we come back around to Joy Center or the Joy Elevator and the pain processing pathway, and just what are their connections there to clarify?
So I would start here, and that is our brains have 2 sides, right hemisphere, left hemisphere. The right and the 2 mirror each other. That is, there's a cingulate on both sides. There's an amygdala on both sides. They parallel each other. But they operate kind of like a Mac and a PC. So the right hemisphere is the part of our brain that we call the joy elevator. And the joy elevator, we call that because it is an attachment system. In his book, The Joy Switch, Chris Corsi calls it the relational circuit, which not to be confused with relational circuits, plural, which are things that go there. He's talking about the fact that there is a loop here that is constantly looping, 6 times per second in our brain. And that's the joy elevator. So it's going up and down 6 times per second. And what's happening with that joy elevator, it is running in the background, kind of like radar all of the time. And we don't think about it. In the same way that we usually don't think about our breathing. We usually don't think about how we're walking or riding a bike, that sort of thing. This stuff just kind of runs in the background. And so we have to train it, just like we train ourselves to ride a bike well, or just like if you learn how to play ping pong really well, you're not really thinking about what you're doing. You're just reacting. The same way, if I train this joy elevator well, then what'll happen is I will handle a lot of my emotions quickly and instinctively before I ever get to the part of my brain that thinks about it. And that's our goal. We want to develop really strong habits on that joy elevator so that by the time the left brain gets there and starts thinking about things, I've already resolved a lot of my emotional issues. I'm well on the way to recovery already.
Yes. A well-functioning joy elevator and pain processing pathways.
Yeah. Well, and then the connection to the pain processing pathway is basically that just as there are 4 floors on the joy elevator, plus then the narrative engine on the left side of the brain, that's the 5 levels. And those are the 5 levels of the pain processing pathway. And again, we're not talking about physical pain here. I think I got an email somewhere saying, well, does this work for physical pain? The answer is no. This is all about emotional pain. But physical pain can create emotional pain, right? My physical pain can make me angry. My physical pain can make me scared. My physical pain can make me depressed because I'm like, well, is this ever going to end? And so it's the emotions that are caused by physical pain is a lot of what needs to be managed, especially for people who struggle with chronic pain. It's the emotions that it's generated that is one of the bigger things that we have to deal with. So this helps, and that's why when we talk about the pain processing pathway, we're talking about what is the proper intervention at all 5 levels. And it makes sense in the narrative top part there that it's speaking, it's a narrative, it's correcting our beliefs at some level, and then it's correcting our identity is the next level down, and so on. We go on down to the very bottom where we just need somebody to be with us.
Thank you. Thank you for explaining that all together. I think we did that in the first episode of this little series, but we are then at the end of our episode. And so before I get your final thoughts, I just want to remind everyone, get me your questions for our anniversary episode on the 24th. I need your questions by July 18th. 2023. I'll post the Google form link on Deeper Walk's Instagram and Facebook, and I will include it in my Monday emails. If you are a Deeper Walk email subscriber, you should get those. I'm excited to hear from you, and huzzah. All right, Father.
All right.
Final thoughts.
So in talking about how we recover from emotions, I don't want to make it sound like it's just super easy to get over hard things. The main point I'm trying to make is that there is hardware in our brains that needs to be developed that will make this easier. And that is, the less developed this hardware in our brain is, the harder and slower and more painful it's going to be to get through our emotions. The more we work on developing this, this joy elevator in our brains, the more we work on the skills that build that is going to make it easier. It doesn't mean I'm not going to have the big emotions. It doesn't mean I'm not going to have to go through it, but I will be in a better position to go through it if that is functioning well and that is well developed. So just make sure that's clear. I'm not saying, hey, do a few of these things and this will be easy.
Right.
But it is that if you don't have this well done, then this could drag on for a long time. It could be really painful.
So level 5. Give us the elevator pitch, no pun intended,
yes.
for level 5.
So level 5 basically means we've moved from the right side of our brain to the left side of our brain. And this is the part my brain that does and is non-relational, and because it is focused on problem solving. So I'm analytical, logical, I'm putting words to things, and so on. So I have On the left side of my brain is where I have narratives, it's where I have beliefs, and it's where we have a thing called the VLE. That's kind of a just a term that Dr. Lehman invented, but it's this idea that my brain wants to give a logical explanation to whatever it is that I'm going through. So that's where we're on that side of the brain now. That's level 5.
Okay, so VLE, verbal logical explainer.
Yep.
Very good. All right, so when we are feeling stuck at this level, what does it feel like?
Well, when I'm stuck at this level, it can feel all kinds of ways because it can generate a wide range of emotions, right? So different beliefs tend to trigger specific emotions. So if I'm feeling like something's impossible, I'll feel depressed. If I'm feeling like something like is unjust, then I'll be angry. If I'm feeling like something is, scary, I'm going to be anxious. If my mind is full of what if thoughts, what if this happens? What if that happens? I'm going to be full of, full of anxiety as I think about that. So it's hard to say when I'm stuck in this side of my brain what it feels like because it can be almost any emotion.
The intervention is accurate information or a new perspective.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. So what happens with beliefs is that my dad used to say, people don't always practice what they say they believe, but they always practice what they really believe. And what he meant by this was, for example, my beliefs about God. I can believe that God is good, that God loves me, that God has a plan, that he's got everything under control. But there can be a part in my heart where I'm wounded that has a different belief system. And that wounded part in my heart can believe that God's actually cruel or God is, untrustworthy and you certainly can't rely on him. And what does it mean to trust God anyway? And so what happens then is when that gets triggered, I become double-minded in the sense that I have two competing belief systems going in my head. When I have two competing belief systems going on in my thinking and I'm battling back and forth, that's exhausting, right? It makes me emotionally unstable. I can ping pong back and forth between multiple emotions. I can go from anger to sadness to despair to shame, maybe get a little bit of joy in there and then go right back into some other things because I'm ping ponging all the way around because my beliefs aren't stable. My beliefs are sometimes clear and sometimes not. I sometimes think it's easier sometimes for an atheist who is single-minded about something to have a greater sense of peace than a Christian who is double-minded about something. And so if somebody is all in on what they believe, they're going to tend to have for want of better words, a more stable kind of approach to that because they're single-minded. Whereas some of us, our problem is that we flip back and forth between our perspective on things. They can be radically different and there's this war going on inside, and that's what makes it so hard.
You got very deep and philosophical very quickly,
I
appreciate that.
Yeah.
I love the epicness and the going deep. I will tell you where my brain was at when I initially asked the question,
Sure.
which I'm very glad you answered that because I think that was also great. Like if you're on a walk and you think, oh, the end of this walk is, really far away and I just want it to be done. And you start having emotions like, and then you find out, oh, actually it's right there. And just having your, new information or your perspective shift calms all of that. Like that was the only level you were stuck at. You weren't thinking, oh, I'm so alone as I'm walking on this, or if you're just thinking, oh, it's that far, and then you find out it's not that far or something like that, that would just be a really simple version of.
Yeah, no, it can be very simple. So, one of the biggest meltdowns I ever had,
Okay.
all right, was in high school. I was on the baseball team, and we had a night game on the Saturday before Easter. So the next morning is Easter sunrise service. I'm supposed to sing in a group at the church for the Sunday morning service, we are out of town for this game, about 2 hours from town. But it was going to be one game, done, go home. And so we played from 7 to 9, and all of a sudden the coach announces, we're going to make this a doubleheader, right? We're playing till midnight, and I'm not going to get home till 3 a.m. and have to turn right around. And I was mad. I mean, I was angry. And to make it worse, the last play of the first game, I had totally messed something up. And the coach had yelled at me, and he was, he made a bad problem bigger. And I was just already at the edge of my capacity, and I just lost it. It's like, no, and how do you tell somebody I have to sing in a choir at church tomorrow? I can't be playing, that's not, it was really awkward. I'm trying to figure out, I just, I remember thinking that, but believing like, that I was trapped, that there was no way out of this, that this was unfair, that they should have announced it, and all these other, and that was one of the things I just remember completely losing it. I was like, I was over the corner literally sobbing by the time we were done, because I'm like, I cannot, and because I ended up saying things to the coach that I got so mad I quit. Mm-hmm. And it was just really bizarre because it was all over Easter and needing to be at church in the morning. And I realized there had to be something else going on. But in the moment, those were the thoughts running through my head were all about, this is not fair. This is not right. This is, you shouldn't be doing this to me.
So did you get a perspective change, or was there a different level that got?
Yeah, after a good cry, because after quitting and like all shook up, I went back, I apologized, and I told him, I said, look, I'm just overwhelmed by the whole thing, and it got too much. I overreacted, I'm sorry. So he let me back on the team, but then he benched me for a few games. Oh. And so what ended up, and really it was kind of interesting because God uses all things together for good. Honestly, I was on pace to be all conference that year, and I might have gotten scholarship offer someplace. Who knows what else, how that might have changed my life. But by getting benched, I basically still made second team all conference that year. But I missed 6 games and probably missed my chance at college baseball. But it was there's a lot of meltdown around that. But so some of that was attachments, but a lot of it was also just the things I was believing were driving my emotions, and I didn't have the emotional capacity to develop to handle that well. So realize now, if I had taken a breather, taken a deep breath, gone off, collected myself first, and not tried to handle, my problem was I didn't have any of these skills, didn't know how to do it. And I tried to handle it all right in the moment and just, vented everything I was feeling. So there you go. That's my cathartic story for the day. But
I'm sure people can relate. So the narrative engine on the left side of the brain, it is separate from the joy center. Could you explain how the pathway of going from right to left and how our beliefs and our pain interact with each other based off of that flow?
Yeah. So what will happen is that my beliefs can affect my ability to be happy, right? And my ability to have joy. So what'll happen is it'll trigger things at a different part of my brain. But what happens, for example, is in anticipating to be with somebody, right? I can get very excited and very happy about something that never happens. But so I can have the belief that I am going to see this person and it's going to be this way and this is all going to be amazing, and have real joy based on that belief. But the reason that belief is creating joy is that I already have attachment with that person. In other words, if it was somebody I didn't have an attachment with, it wouldn't have the same kind of impact. So, but my beliefs have a lot to do with whether I'm happy or not. Because if I am thinking to myself, this is going to be terrible, this is going to be awful, I'm going to go see this person, they don't really want to see me, and I don't know why I'm wasting my time. There's all kinds of lot of things I can tell myself that just suck the joy out of things that otherwise would be fun. And so learning to recognize common patterns that I have that suck the joy out of things, so that I can put a stop to that and say, no, wait a second, I recognize this pattern. I don't want to go down that thought trail again, what should I be putting my thoughts on instead? How do I replace my beliefs with something else? That's really a key part of what we're talking about here, because we just sabotage so much of our joy by getting into these mental holes that we fall into, and where everything that we're telling ourselves is just reinforcing negative emotions. So all of this emphasis on attachment is not to negate the idea that beliefs don't have a very powerful role in driving the way that we feel. It's to say that there is something else going on too that tends to get overlooked. So we spend a lot of time over there on the attachment, but the beliefs really, if you can get your beliefs changed, an awful lot of your emotions will resolve.
So whatever is good and true and noble.
Yeah, whatever is good and true and noble and right, whatever is lovely, think on these things. Even praising God and focusing on what's good and wonderful about God. The getting my mind in a good space makes a big difference. I talk about athletics. I was one of the things, I was a pitcher for a while in Little League, and my dad taught me to picture myself doing everything perfect before I threw the ball. So when I would stand on the pitching mound and I would look in there, I knew exactly whether it's fastball, changeup, curveball, exactly where it was going to go. I could picture the catcher is this going to be high right, inside left? Where's this? Everything about it, I knew exactly what it was. So he was like, get it completely sure. So you're not guessing. You're not just throwing it up there and hoping for the best. You know exactly what you're trying to do. He said, just take like 1 to 2 seconds before you throw the ball and picture it perfectly. So what I found was that the better I got at that, just the more confident I was. And so getting your beliefs clear, trusting that, and then can really help your performance. So in a lot of performance things, getting your beliefs right clears your head so that what you have done on the right engine side about building habits and building skills, whether it can just flow. And that's why sometimes we got to get out of the way. It's like, especially when we're talking about performance things, whether it's art or music or sports or something like that, if I'm thinking about what I'm doing, I can't do it properly. I've got to get that part of my brain out of the way and just enjoy what I'm doing. And it makes...
That was a word from the Lord to you at one point too.
It was. Well, even when I preach, I remember the first time I was going to preach in front of about 2,000 people. And it was like the biggest crowd at that time I'd ever spoken to. And I was getting nervous, and I was praying about it. And what I felt like God said was, just enjoy this. And I've learned ever since then that if I enjoy it, chances are other people are going to enjoy it. If I'm thinking about it, then it's probably not going to go well.
Right. Yes. That will literally preach.
Yeah, literally preach.
All right. So I am going to zoom us out to the whole pathway again, but is there anything specifically on level 5 you want to make sure you cover before we do that?
Well, I will say, Neil Anderson helped me understand this, not directly, it wasn't a one-on-one conversation, but his books. And that is that he wrote in, I don't remember now if it was Victory Over Darkness or Bondage Breaker, but specifically this idea that when I am depressed, it's usually because I believe something is impossible that I feel is crucial to my happiness. So relationally, if I fall in love with somebody and they don't love me back, and this feels impossible, then that's going to make me depressed because I am convinced that only this person can make me happy, and this is now impossible. Or if I think I can only be happy if I get out of debt, and it's just going to be impossible to get out of this debt load anytime soon, maybe I feel like it's impossible or ever going to get out of this, then things that are impossible, that I believe to be impossible, tend to create despair. The things that that I think are uncertain, or they are what I would say things I can imagine being catastrophic, like what if this happens? What if they hate me? What if this is terrible? What if people, are mean to me? What if I feel pain? All of the what ifs of life, they create anxiety. And then when I want something and something or someone gets in the way, I get angry. And the wording that he used was, it's blocking your goal. And that makes a lot of sense. That's what happens with road rage, right? Someone has blocked my goal. I was just cruising along fine, and all of a sudden they cut in and they literally blocked me, from doing what I wanted to do. And so what I look at is that makes me angry. And now that I am angry, I've got to go to all of the things on the right side of my brain that I have learned for how do I act like myself when I'm angry so that I don't turn into a road rage idiot. But it is sometimes it helps actually escalate it a little bit in my thinking before I bring it back down. So all of those things. So it was helpful to me to think about these big three specifically, and that is despair, anger, and anxiety are all anchored really in things that we believe.
Mm-hmm. And your imagination, it's powerful stuff. I think sometimes about just sacred imagination, and how sometimes when people are afraid of, dwell a lot on the anxiety side of imagination and where that's bad, like it almost counters to just not using your imagination. And anyway, that's probably a different topic.
God gave us an imagination for a reason. I mean, you think about it, how much of the world is unseen to us? And so based on what we know, we have to use our imagination for an awful lot of things. And the average person throughout history didn't travel more than 30 miles from where they were born their whole lives. And so how much of what was out there was imagination? And so it is that God wants us to use our imagination. He wants us to engage with that. What the Bible does is it gives us it gives us a foundation and parameters for our thought life. The foundation is the worldview, and then the parameters are the, very specific things that it says are true, principles that are true. And so that gives us the foundation parameters, but within that, God likes, imagination is a gift God gave us.
Huzzah! As someone who has just come from a writers' conference this weekend, I hear to that. So let's zoom back out to the pain processing pathway as a whole. Can you put all these steps together for us, maybe with a story? Maybe, I don't know if it's easier for you to tell a story of pain of an elevator that is functioning properly, or where it gets stuck along the way. But if you could tell us a story.
Yeah. So what happens with when I'm stuck because of something I'm believing, if a person can just tell me, what I need to be believing, instead it can help. So biblical counseling really focuses a lot on the belief part of this. And then it moved from belief to making choices and accountability on those choices. And all that stuff can work if that's where I'm stuck. But the deeper my stuckness is, the less helpful that is. So let me put it this way. I've had emotions there are emotions that can make me feel like I'm 15. There's emotions that can make me feel like I'm 10. There's things that can happen to me make me feel like I'm 7. There's things that can happen to make me feel like I'm 3, right? So kind of part of this depends on how deeply am I getting triggered here, and how far down in the system am I going? Because the younger I feel, the less anything is going to help except like sit with me, soothe, right? Stay with me and help me soothe. Because until that happens, we aren't going to get anywhere else. So I remember being in great, just battling anxiety. I'd had a panic attack. I was trying to recover from this attack. I was trying to talk to somebody about it. I remember the first person I talked to was like, well, fear is a sin. Oh. So, you should just stop it.
Oh, thank you. Yes,
yeah.
thanks.
So there was their narrative reaction, and whether they were right or not, it wasn't going to help. And then I had, but there was somebody else who came and they sat with me, and they connected with me. And I found that just being in a place where I could be relational with people was soothing, and it began to relax. I had another time when I was experiencing a significant amount of depression because of somebody broken up with me in seminary, and I met a guy who had almost exactly the same story, only his was worse, right? It's like his fiance had left him at the altar. I mean, he had, and just everything that I was going through, he had gone through, only worse. But here he was as I'm talking to him, he was married, he had 4 kids, he was, happy, he was in seminary, he's letting me know. He says, look, God's got this, you're going to be okay. So a setting like that, he was with me. We built some joy together. And then we got to the story, and then we got to the narrative, and he helped me to shift my narrative and my way of thinking about that. And so what happens then is that Satan then counterattacks and says, are you sure you want to believe that narrative? Are you sure that's the truth? And so I find myself in this battle for my mind. And that is, God just sent somebody who was able to sit down with me, identify completely with what I was going through, and tell me, how his story ended all right. And now the enemy's saying, yeah, but that doesn't mean your story is going to be all right. And so now you're in this battle for your mind. Which one are you going to hold on to? And there does come a point where you just have to say to the enemy, get out of here right now and take your thoughts with you and leave. And I am going to choose to trust, God and put my faith in him, and my emotions will eventually follow if I do that consistently.
Yes. Have you seen any solutions, quote unquote, that people will often try that don't work, either because they're targeting the wrong level of the brain function, or because it flat out doesn't work? Like telling somebody who's experiencing fear that it's a sin.
Yeah. So the classically is people try to argue you into feeling better. Like, oh, well, the Bible says this and the Bible says that, and this is true and that's true. And they're addressing everything at the belief level of, if you just get your belief straight, and here it is. And they get to the point where they're actually arguing with you about it, and they get mad at you that you aren't believing the truth, because this truth will set you free. It's just like I'm free. And I'm like, well, you're not really free right now. So it's that's the first one that pops into my mind. It's like people get so fixated on the truth will set you free. So here's the truth. And why won't you just embrace the truth, that they end up getting frustrated with you and angry with you. And, or they, like, I'll skip it. This is never going to work. And they quit on you because they're only focused on the narrative, and they don't see all the other elements that go into this. So yeah, that's probably the most common one.
All right. Well, we are at the end of the episode here. So I'm just going to remind everybody that, hey, next week, join us for our 1-year anniversary. And if you want to just squeak in some questions for that, there is still a little bit of time, or you can email me anytime. If you're a Deeper Walk email subscriber, you'll get my Monday emails, and you can respond to those if you want. I love hearing from you. And yeah, there's a Google form that's going to be in the Monday emails, and then I'll also have it in the Deeper Walks Instagram and Facebook that you can fill out and give us your testimonies, your questions. Really excited to hear from you and to celebrate on the 24th. So, Father, any closing thoughts for this whole pain processing pathway series?
Well, one of the things that, as I think about all of this, is like, there's a reason why I've just turned in a manuscript to Moody called Breakthrough.
Huzzah!
And, yeah. And this manuscript, we're still in the editing phases of it, but it's meant to get at this idea that there are multiple sources, multiple engines, if you will, that drive the way that we feel. And so we don't want to be overly simplistic, either in this one strategy will always make you feel better, or dealing with this one engine will always fix everything, or even overly simplistic, and this one strategy always fixes this engine. So we do need to have an understanding of how all these things fit together, especially when we're dealing with big battles that don't always have easy solutions. It can be helpful to understand why it's big and why there's so much going on. and why we might need to interact with more than just one person to get through whatever it is that we're dealing with.
Thanks for joining us on the trail today. Did you like this episode? Would you like more people to see it? This is the part where I ask you to like, comment, subscribe, share with a friend. And do you love this channel? One of the best ways that you can support us is by becoming a Deeper Walk trailblazer. Thanks again. We'll see you back on the trail next week.